He never raised his voice, never bragged, never fought for applause. For decades, Chuck Norris walked through Hollywood like a shadow, quiet, disciplined, and untouchable, a man forged not in fame, but in restraint. His power was never in his fists, it was in his control. Born on March 10, 1940, in the small town of Ryan, Oklahoma, Chuck grew up in silence. Poverty was his first opponent, fear his second. His father, Ray Norris, a World War II veteran, battled demons of his own, the kind that came in a bottle. His mother, Wilma, carried the weight of 3 sons on her back, moving from place to place, praying for a little peace. Chuck once admitted he had no confidence, not in school, not in sports, not even in himself. But everything changed in 1958 when he joined the U.S. Air Force and was stationed in South Korea. There, he discovered Tang Soo Do, not just a martial art, but a philosophy. It taught him control, patience, and the quiet strength that would define his entire life. When he returned home, he poured everything into it, opening karate schools, teaching discipline to anyone willing to learn. Among his students were the Steve McQueen and Bob Barker, both drawn not by fame, but by the aura of a man who lived his code. By the late 1960s, Chuck was undefeated, his calm precision making him a legend in the martial arts world. Then one phone call changed everything. Bruce Lee wanted him for a film called Way of the Dragon. It was an offer that would transform a humble instructor into a global icon. Yet even as fame surrounded him, Chuck never lost himself. He remained silent, steady, and honorable. But Hollywood was changing. Honor was fading, and even a man of peace can only stay silent for so long. Because one day, Chuck Norris, the master of control, finally broke his silence and named the 4 men who had betrayed his code. Long before the world knew him as the Muscles from Brussels, Jean-Claude Van Damme was just another dreamer in Los Angeles, broke, hungry, and desperate to belong. It was the early 1980s, the golden age of martial arts mania. Karate schools were opening on every corner, and Hollywood was searching for its next action star. Van Damme drove taxis by day and worked nightclub doors by night. One of those doors belonged to Woody's Wharf, a Redondo Beach bar owned by none other than Chuck Norris. At first, their relationship was simple. The young Belgian admired the American master, humble, calm, and unshakable. Chuck, in turn, saw potential, a student with heart, a man who might one day carry the torch. But admiration can sour when ambition enters the room. By the late 80s, Van Damme's career was exploding. Bloodsport, kickboxer, and cyborg made him a household name. He was youth, flash, and raw charisma. Chuck represented tradition, discipline, and quiet dignity. 2 men, 2 codes, one rooted in stillness, the other in spectacle. Then came the night that broke it all. At a private Hollywood gathering in the early 90s, Van Damme, brimming with confidence, walked up to Chuck in front of a small crowd and challenged him to fight. Laughter rippled through the room. It was supposed to be a joke, a bit of bravado. Chuck only smiled, calm as ever, and said softly, "I don't fight for entertainment." The room went silent for a heartbeat, then filled again with nervous laughter. But Chuck's smile faded the moment he turned away. That single line drew a line that would never be crossed again. When rumors later surfaced about a possible collaboration between the two, Chuck declined. The respect had been broken, and respect was sacred. Years later, at a martial arts event in Texas, a reporter asked Chuck about Van Damme. He didn't sneer or rant. He simply said, "He's talented, but undisciplined." For any other man, that might sound like faint praise. For Chuck Norris, it was the harshest condemnation imaginable, because to him, discipline wasn't just a skill, it was honor itself. If Van Damme's offense was arrogance, Steven Seagal's was something colder, pride. Their rivalry wasn't born from one heated moment, but from years of quiet contempt. By the late 1980s, Seagal had exploded into Hollywood stardom with Above the Law, followed by Hard to Kill and Under Siege. He moved like ice, controlled, ruthless, untouchable. His Aikido skills dazzled audiences and made him an instant icon. But behind the camera, Seagal's reputation was already unraveling. He was confident, too confident. In interviews, he mocked other martial artists, dismissing them as movie fighters. He even belittled Bruce Lee, calling him overrated, and sneered that American fighters like Chuck Norris were entertainers, not warriors. For most people, those were just words, but for Chuck, they were a wound. Bruce Lee wasn't just a co-star. He was a friend, a teacher, a brother in arms. To hear a man like Seagal mock that bond cut deeper than any punch could. Chuck didn't answer in the press. He never did. Silence was his weapon. But others in the martial arts world, men like Bob Wall, Bill Superfoot Wallace, and Benny the Jet Urquidez, decided to fight words with challenge. They called themselves the Dirty Dozen, and they publicly invited Seagal to prove his claims in a real fight. He never showed up. For Chuck, that silence from Seagal said everything. From then on, Norris kept his distance. He refused joint interviews, conventions, or charity events that included Seagal's name. When asked about the feud years later, Chuck's tone was firm, but calm. In martial arts, respect is everything. Without it, the art means nothing. He didn't have to name Seagal. Everyone knew who those words were for. It was never a shouting war. It was a cold war. Two men fluent in the same language of movement, yet living by entirely different philosophies. Hollywood celebrated Seagal's swagger, but in the true martial arts world, Chuck's restraint carried far more weight, because respect isn't about dominance, it's about discipline, and that was something a Steven Seagal could never understand. Not every wound Chuck Norris carried came from fighters. Some came from laughter, the kind that cuts deepest when it disguises itself as a joke. In the mid-1990s, Jim Carrey was unstoppable. The Mask, Ace Ventura, Dumb and Dumber, one after another, he reigned as the king of comedy, his elastic face and manic energy dominating Hollywood. Then came the night that changed everything. During a live performance, Carrey decided to parody Chuck Norris. Wearing a fake beard and a cowboy hat, he strutted across the stage with exaggerated seriousness. "I'm Chuck Norris," he announced. "I win fights without even getting off the couch." The audience howled with laughter. But when that clip reached Chuck, he didn't laugh. He didn't see humor, he saw mockery. For Chuck Norris, martial arts wasn't a costume. It was sacred. It wasn't just about fighting. It was about respect, humility, and honor. To him, Carrey's skit wasn't a joke. It was a betrayal of everything he stood for. He didn't fire back in interviews. He didn't sue. He simply erased Carrey from his world. From that day forward, he refused to appear in any event, show, or commercial associated with Jim Carrey. When asked about it later, Chuck's answer was quiet but final. "I'm not part of that circus." Those 6 words carried more force than any roundhouse kick. To Carrey, parody was harmless fun. To Chuck, it was something else entirely. Disrespect disguised as laughter. Because for a man who spent decades teaching control and humility, being turned into a punchline wasn't funny. It was personal. It was painful. Behind his silence was disappointment, not just in Jim Carrey, but in a culture that had forgotten what respect truly meant. Of all the names Chuck Norris ever spoke, none carried more pain than Bruce Lee, because before they were icons, before the world turned them into legends, they were just two men who respected each other more than anyone else. Their friendship began in the late 1960s when martial arts was still underground in America. They met through tournaments, rivals who quickly became brothers. Bruce admired Chuck's precision and control. Chuck admired Bruce's speed and vision. Together, they pushed each other beyond their limits, training, sparring, and debating the philosophy of combat late into the night. In 1971, Bruce called Chuck with an offer. "I'm making a new movie in Hong Kong. I want you to be in it." That movie was The Way of the Dragon. It wasn't just a film, it was their shared dream. To bring real martial arts, not Hollywood imitation, to the big screen. Chuck was cast as Colt, the American fighter who battles Bruce in the film's legendary Coliseum showdown. But behind the camera, their friendship began to strain. Bruce, under intense pressure to deliver perfection, became demanding. Every punch, every kick, rehearsed again and again until flawless. Chuck respected the discipline, but even he began to feel the weight. One day, between takes, he asked Bruce lightly, "Who wins in the end?" Bruce smiled. "I win. I'm the star." They both laughed, but the laughter didn't last. It left a bruise that never healed. When The Way of the Dragon premiered in 1972, it was a triumph. The final fight, brutal, graceful, unforgettable, would be studied for decades. But the friendship that built it quietly faded. After the film, Bruce and Chuck went their separate ways. They never trained together again. A year later, Bruce Lee died suddenly at just 32. The world mourned a legend. Chuck mourned a brother. He stood silently at the funeral. No words, no tears, just an ocean of regret. In later interviews, Chuck always spoke with reverence. He called Bruce a genius. But in a rare moment of honesty, he also said softly, his ego was bigger than the arena we fought in. It wasn't anger, it was grief, the kind that comes from love that ended too soon. Because behind every legend, there's a silence only the heart can hear. For most of his life, Chuck Norris was a man of peace in a business built on conflict. He didn't drink, he didn't party, he didn't boast. He trained, worked, prayed, and raised his family. But even the calmest men reach a point where silence grows heavy. When he finally spoke the names of the 4 men who had betrayed his code, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Steven Seagal, Jim Carrey, and Bruce Lee, it wasn't with anger, it was with disappointment, a confession, not an outburst. After a lifetime of discipline, even silence has its limits. Hollywood had changed. The sacred honor that once defined martial artists was fading, replaced by ego, spectacle, and gossip. Respect, once earned through mastery and humility, became a currency traded for attention. For a man like Chuck, who built his life on loyalty, faith, and discipline, that shift felt like betrayal. Each name he mentioned carried a scar. Van Damme, the student who turned showman. Seagal, the fighter who disrespected the art. Carrey, the comedian who mocked what was sacred. Bruce Lee, the friend who let pride eclipse brotherhood. Yet Chuck never hated them. Not in the way Hollywood loves to imagine hatred. Loud, fiery, public. His kind of hate was colder, quieter, more final. he simply erased them from his world. No confrontation, no reconciliation, just distance. Because when a man like Chuck Norris turns his back on you, it means you've lost something deeper than friendship. You've lost his respect. And yet, beneath that stoic silence lies a quiet tragedy, the loneliness of a man who demanded more from the world than it could ever give back. He has outlived most of his rivals, most of his friends, and still carries the weight of every lesson they taught him. Today, at 85 years old, Chuck Norris lives peacefully in Texas with his wife Gina and their twins, far from the noise of Hollywood. His net worth exceeds $70 million, but that's not the wealth that matters to him. What he values most is peace. The only fight he still believes is worth winning. He once said, "I don't hold grudges, I just remember." That is Chuck Norris's truth, and perhaps his curse. He doesn't seek revenge, he simply never forgets. His silence, his loyalty, his distance, they are all part of one unbreakable code. The same code he's lived by since South Korea, since the Air Force, since the first time he tied a black belt around his waist. 4 names, 4 lessons, about pride, loyalty, and the price of honor. Because in the end, Chuck Norris taught us one thing that Hollywood never understood. Strength isn't about fighting, it's about knowing when to walk away.